The media. In September of 1960, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon met for the first televised presidential debate in American history. Here is the strange part. People who listened on the radio thought Nixon won. He gave substantive answers and debated well, but people who watched on television saw something different. A pale, sweaty Nixon, still recovering from the flu, next to a tanned, composed Kennedy. Television viewers handed the win to Kennedy, and many historians believe it handed him the election too. Same debate, same words, two completely different outcomes depending on the medium. That is the power we are talking about today. How the media shapes American politics, and how American politics shapes the media right back, setting the context. So what do we mean by the media? The term covers every format that carries information to the public. Newspapers and magazines, radio, broadcast and cable television, and now the internet and social media. Taken together, all of these forms make up what we call the mass media. The media in a free society perform several jobs at once. First, they inform and entertain. Media outlets are businesses, and advertisers only pay when there are viewers and readers. So whatever attracts an audience survives. Second, they act as watchdogs over government and public officials. This role is so central to democracy that the press is sometimes called the fourth estate, standing alongside the three branches of government. Thomas Jefferson put it plainly, where the press is free, no government will be without censors. Third, the media set the agenda, deciding which issues get public attention at all. When American networks finally aired footage of famine in Ethiopia in the early 1980s, charitable giving poured in. The famine had been happening for years. It only became a story when the media decided it was one. One more piece of context matters here. Who owns all of this? In the 1980s, more than 50 companies owned most of American television and radio. Today, just 4 conglomerates control roughly 90% of US media outlets. When ownership concentrates like that, a single corporate policy can shape what millions of people see or never see. Main points. Let's trace how we got here, because each new format changed politics in its own way. Print came first. Colonial newspapers helped spark the revolution, spreading word of British misdeeds. Then came the party press era of the 1780s, when political parties funded newspapers and papers printed open propaganda, even attacking George Washington. The penny press of the 1830s made papers affordable to everyone, and Joseph Pulitzer's sensational, scandal-heavy style became known as yellow journalism. The pendulum swung back in 1896, when Adolph Ochs bought the New York Times and revived a model built on accuracy and impartiality. The progressive era brought muckraking, reporting that exposed corrupt business and government. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle led directly to the Pure Food and Drug Act. Today, print struggles financially. 1/5 of small-town newspapers have folded, which means many Americans simply know less about their own communities. Radio arrived in the 1920s and gave politicians a personal channel into American living rooms. Franklin Roosevelt mastered it with his Fireside Chats, calming a panicked nation during the banking crisis by speaking to families like a father sitting in the room. Radio politics never fully faded either. Talk radio revived it in the 1980s and 1990s. Television combined sound with pictures and changed everything. Edward R. Murrow gave TV journalism its foothold in 1951, and from the 1960s through the 1990s, presidents enjoyed a golden age of presidential television. When they spoke, nearly everyone watched, because there was little else on. Presidents also used TV to unite the country in a crisis, feeding the rally round the flag effect. After his bullhorn speech at Ground Zero following September 11th, George W. Bush's approval jumped from 51 to 90%. Then came cable, the internet, and social media, which shattered the old system. Viewers can now avoid news entirely, and State of the Union viewership has fallen by half. Citizen journalism means anyone with a phone can break a story. The Rodney King footage in 1991 came from a private citizen's camcorder. Younger audiences increasingly prefer soft news, shows that deliver information through humor, and studies show viewers of programs like The Daily Show sometimes answer more current events questions correctly than viewers of traditional news. Now the rules. Freedom of the press is written into the First Amendment, but it is not absolute. The media cannot commit slander, spoken falsehoods meant to harm someone, or libel, the printed version. Public figures face a higher bar. Under New York Times versus Sullivan, they must prove reckless disregard for the truth or actual malice. The government can also block publication in rare cases called prior restraint. But the Pentagon Papers case in 1971 made clear that power is very limited, covering things like troop movements and the names of undercover operatives. Broadcasters face an extra layer of oversight from the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC licenses stations, polices indecency on the public airwaves, and enforces the equal time rule, which requires stations to offer rival candidates the same airtime opportunities at the same price. There used to be a fairness doctrine requiring balanced coverage of controversial issues, but it was repealed in 1987, and transparency runs the other direction too. Sunshine Laws and the Freedom of Information Act require government agencies to open documents and proceedings to the public. Application and deeper example. So, does all this coverage actually change minds? Researchers have wrestled with that for a century. Early thinkers proposed the hypodermic theory, the idea that media inject information straight into our brains and we accept it. Later studies swung the other way, finding people filter news through conversations with friends, producing the minimal effects theory. The modern view, cultivation theory, sits in between. Media shape our picture of reality over time. What we see regularly becomes our world. Two tools make that shaping happen. The first is framing, the context a story is given. Coverage of homelessness that interviews a few individuals and quotes this month's statistics is episodic framing. Coverage that examines why homelessness grows over decades is thematic framing. Episodic stories create sympathy. Thematic ones inform but leave viewers detached. The second tool is priming, when coverage predisposes us toward a conclusion. If a paper runs weeks of stories about layoffs and struggling factories, and then asks readers to rate the president's job performance, those readers have been primed to say no. These effects show up in troubling places. Studies find local news overrepresents African Americans as criminals and white Americans as victims, and magazine images misrepresent who actually lives in poverty. That racial framing shapes real attitudes and even voting on welfare policy. Coverage of women candidates has long dwelled on viability and family instead of positions on the issues, and fear of that coverage is one documented reason fewer women run for office. Campaign coverage itself has thinned out. Journalists now favor horse race coverage, analyzing who is up, who is down, and who stumbled, rather than what candidates would actually do. In 2012, 64% of election stories focused on strategy. Only 9% covered domestic policy positions. Soundbites tell the same story. The average candidate clip shrank from 42 seconds in 1968 to about 8 seconds by 2004. Candidates have responded by going around journalists entirely, using social media to speak directly to voters, for better and for worse. Conclusion and key takeaways. Here is what to carry with you. The media are the connective tissue between citizens and government. They inform us, entertain us, watch the powerful, and set the public agenda. Each new technology, from the penny press to the smartphone, has rewritten the relationship between politicians and the public. Press freedom is foundational but bounded. Libel, slander, classified secrets, and FCC rules all mark its edges, while FOIA and Sunshine Laws pry government open in return. And the media's influence on us is real but subtle, working through framing, priming, and the daily choice of what counts as news. Which brings us back to Kennedy and Nixon. The lesson of that night in 1960 was never just about makeup and stage lighting. It was that the messenger shapes the message. The next time you watch a story, ask yourself two questions. What frame is this using? And what did they choose not to show me? Answering those makes you exactly the kind of citizen a free press is supposed to serve. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.